Captain Ben Salomon looks up from bandaging a shrapnel wound. It's 5:00 a.m., July 7, 1944, and the sound is unmistakable, not rifle fire, but a roar. Thousands of voices screaming, "Banzai!" A Japanese soldier appears at the tent entrance, walks to an unarmed American lying on the ground, raises his bayonet, and drives it downward into the wounded man's chest. Salomon, a 29-year-old dentist from Beverly Hills, grabs the nearest rifle and fires from a squatting position. The attacker falls. Then 2 more soldiers appear. Then 4 crawl under the tent walls. Within 90 seconds, 7 Japanese soldiers are fighting 1 American dentist inside a canvas medical tent filled with 30 wounded men who cannot defend themselves. What Salomon can't know, is that he's facing the largest Banzai charge in the entire Pacific War. At exactly 4:45 a.m. on July 7, 1944, between 3,000 and 6,000 Japanese soldiers are throwing themselves in suicidal waves against a 1,000-yard stretch of American defensive line along Saipan's western coast. This isn't a probing attack. This isn't a tactical retreat. This is Gyokusai, honorable death. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito ordered it the night before, gathering every man who could stand, regular infantry, naval personnel, support troops, the walking wounded. Some carry rifles. Others have bamboo spears. Some have knives lashed to sticks. But they all have the same order: kill 10 Americans before you die. The attack hits hardest at the 2 battalions of the 105th Infantry Regiment, the units that intelligence had identified as the weak point in the American line. Major Edward McCarthy, commanding the 2nd Battalion, would later describe it like a stampede from a Western movie, except the Japanese just kept on coming. It didn't make any difference if you shot one, 5 more would take his place. The American defensive line shatters. Japanese soldiers pour through the gaps between the 1st and 2nd Battalions, overrunning machine gun positions, stabbing wounded soldiers in their foxholes, pushing toward command posts and artillery batteries. This is total warfare with no rear areas, no protected zones, no non-combatants. When your perimeter breaks against 5,000 screaming attackers, everyone fights or everyone dies. Lieutenant Colonel William J. O'Brien, commanding the 1st Battalion, grabs a pistol in each hand and walks up and down his defensive line, firing into the faces of attackers. When both pistols run dry, he's already severely wounded in the shoulder. He doesn't retreat. He jumps onto a jeep-mounted machine gun and continues firing until American forces retake the position that evening. They find O'Brien's body surrounded by at least 30 dead Japanese soldiers. Private Thomas A. Baker, severely wounded early in the assault, is being carried to the rear when his rescuer is also hit. Baker refuses further evacuation. "I'd rather die than risk any more of my friends," he says. He demands to be propped against a tree with a pistol and 8 bullets. When American troops find him hours later, the pistol is empty. 8 Japanese soldiers lie dead around him. And Captain Salomon is fighting 7 Japanese soldiers hand to hand inside his medical tent, protecting 30 wounded Americans who cannot defend themselves. The Banzai charge continues for 12 hours. By 6:00 p.m. on July 7, American forces have regained all lost ground, but the carnage is almost incomprehensible. In front of the 105th Regiment's positions, 2,295 Japanese bodies. Behind American lines, meaning they broke through, another 2,016 dead. Total Japanese killed in the single day's assault, 4,311. The American losses, 406 killed and 512 wounded in just 2 battalions, 918 total casualties. But the line held. Saipan is declared secure 2 days later. The island becomes America's forward bomber base, the platform from which B-29s can finally reach the Japanese home islands. Within 4 months, the first B-29 raid on Tokyo launches from Saipan's runways. The battle directly leads to the resignation of Japanese Prime Minister Hideki Tojo and his entire cabinet. Lieutenant Colonel O'Brien receives the Medal of Honor on May 9, 1945. Private Baker receives it the same day. Both awards are posthumous, but they're processed quickly. Captain Ben Salomon's Medal of Honor recommendation is also submitted immediately. Captain Edmund G. Love, the 27th Division's official historian, documents everything the 7 Japanese soldiers killed. Inside the tent, the 98 bodies found in front of the machine gun position, the 76 bullet and bayonet wounds on Salomon's body. Brigadier General Ogden J. Ross personally requests the Medal of Honor. The evidence is overwhelming. Major General George W. Greiner, commanding general of the 27th Infantry Division, rejects it. The official reason: medical officers cannot bear arms against the enemy under the Geneva Convention. By manning a crew-served weapon, a machine gun, Salomon forfeited his status as a protected non-combatant. If he's not a non-combatant, he's just a soldier doing his job. The rejection stands. The 27th Division moves to the next battle. The story becomes a footnote. It would take 58 years to correct that injustice. The invisible enemy wasn't Japanese tactics. It was American institutional thinking about what war should look like. The United States military in 1944 operated on rational calculus. You don't spend lives when you can spend bullets. You don't charge machine guns when you can call in artillery. You retreat when positions become untenable and regroup with reinforcements. Every military academy taught this. Every field manual codified it. The problem was that the Japanese military operated on an entirely different calculus. Death was not a cost, it was currency. Here's the mathematical reality that American commanders couldn't process. When your enemy considers a 100% casualty rate not just acceptable but honorable, every conventional defensive calculation breaks down. American defensive doctrine assumed attackers would retreat after 30 to 40% losses. Japanese commanders ordered attacks expecting 100% losses and considered it success if each man killed even 3 Americans before dying. The M1917 Browning machine gun that Captain Salomon eventually manned could fire 450 to 600 rounds per minute. At that rate, with 250-round ammunition belts, a trained crew could theoretically put 10 to 12,000 rounds downrange per hour. But here's what American tacticians discovered the hard way. When 5,000 human beings are running at your position in waves, even a 50% kill rate per magazine still means thousands reach your line. And once they reach your line with bayonets, grenades, and swords, your machine gun becomes a 103-pound paperweight. Every instinct, every bit of training told American soldiers the wrong thing when facing Banzai charges. Instinct said, hold your fire until you see clear targets. Reality, with thousands attacking in darkness, clear targets meant they were already at bayonet range. Instinct said, fall back to secondary positions when primary lines are overrun. Reality, the Japanese strategy was to break through and slaughter anyone falling back, wounded, medics, headquarters staff. Instinct said, medical personnel stay neutral, wear Red Cross insignia, treat wounded regardless of uniform. Reality, Japanese soldiers systematically targeted aid stations. One sergeant described it like Yankee Stadium with the crowd milling onto the field, so many of them you could shut your eyes and pull the trigger and hit 3 or 4 with one shot. The human brain isn't wired to process thousands of humans running directly at you with the explicit goal of dying while killing. It triggers every prey animal instinct to flee, which is exactly what makes the defensive line collapse. But here's the deeper problem. American military doctrine in 1944 had no framework for understanding jokusai. The Geneva Convention assumed combatants wanted to survive. Rules of war assumed armies operated to preserve their forces. Even intelligence assessments consistently underestimated Japanese willingness to die. American planners estimated Saipan's garrison at 15,000 troops. when the actual number was over 30,000 because they couldn't fathom Japan deploying that many men to an indefensible island. Medical officers like Captain Salomon faced an even more insidious barrier: professional identity. Salomon was a dentist. Before the war, he'd had a successful practice in Beverly Hills. He'd been drafted in 1940 as an infantry private and had excelled, promoted to sergeant, declared the best all-around soldier in his regiment, expert marksman, machine gun section leader. But in 1942, the Army discovered he had a dental degree and commissioned him as a dental officer. They took away his combat role and gave him forceps. On June 22, 1944, when the battalion surgeon was critically wounded, Salomon volunteered to take his place. For 15 days, he served as a combat surgeon. But he was still officially a non-combatant. His medical training said, save lives indiscriminately. His infantry training said, kill the enemy. The Geneva Convention said you can't do both. When those 7 Japanese soldiers came through his tent walls at 5:00 a.m. on July 7, every regulation, every bit of medical ethics training said Salomon should identify as non-combatant. The problem was, his patients were being murdered in front of him. The institutional barrier wasn't tactical, it was definitional. Can a healer be a killer? And if he chooses killing to protect those he's healing, what does that make him? The prophecy wasn't about what would happen on Saipan. It was already documented in what did happen, and then was deliberately buried. On July 8, 1944, when American soldiers retook the positions that had been overrun, they found Captain Ben Salomon's body slumped over an M1917 Browning machine gun. In front of his position, arranged in a pattern that made the tactical sequence clear, lay 98 dead Japanese soldiers. Salomon's body bore 76 bullet and bayonet wounds. A medical examination, conducted in the field, right there, determined that 24 of those wounds had been received before death. The other 52 were inflicted on his corpse after he'd fallen over the gun. Captain Edmund G. Love, the 27th Division's official historian, immediately began gathering eyewitness accounts. The surviving wounded soldiers who'd been in Salomon's tent testified to watching him fight off 7 Japanese soldiers in hand-to-hand combat. They described him clubbing one with a rifle butt, bayoneting another, kicking a knife from a third attacker's hand. They testified to his last words, "I'll hold them off until you get them to safety. See you later." Brigadier General Ogden J. Ross, the Assistant Division Commander, personally requested a Medal of Honor recommendation. Love prepared the documentation. The evidence was overwhelming. A medical officer who, when his aid station became a combat zone, made the conscious decision to sacrifice himself so his patients could escape. The recommendation went up the chain of command to Major General George W. Greiner. Greiner rejected it. The official reason: medical officers cannot bear arms against the enemy under the Geneva Convention. The technical justification: Salomon had manned a crew-served weapon, a machine gun. The Geneva Convention allowed medical personnel to carry personal weapons for self-defense, but a machine gun was classified as offensive weaponry. By taking an offensive combat role, Salomon had forfeited his status as a protected non-combatant. And if he wasn't a protected non-combatant, he was just a soldier doing his job. The logic was circular and grotesque. By defending his patients, Salomon had disqualified himself from recognition for defending his patients. But there was another unspoken reason, one that wouldn't be acknowledged for decades. Salomon was Jewish. In 1944, institutional anti-Semitism in the U.S. military was rarely explicit, but consistently present. The first rejection was rarely the last word. It was often the first test of whether anyone cared enough to fight the bureaucracy. For Salomon, no one fought in 1944. The 27th Division moved on. General Ross retired. Captain Love published his division history in 1949, documenting Salomon's actions, but noting the Medal of Honor rejection. The story became a footnote. 46 years later, in 1990, Dr. Robert West was helping prepare a centennial book for the USC School of Dentistry. He came across a brief mention of Benjamin Salomon, USC Dental School class of 1937, who had died heroically on Saipan. West started digging. He found Love's original documentation. He found the eyewitness testimonies. He found the medical examination report documenting 76 wounds. He found the field count of 98 dead Japanese soldiers. And he found the rejection letter. West, who had no military background, had a simple civilian reaction. I was just possessed when I found out it was an error, an innocent error on the part of the commanding general. An error, not policy, not legitimate interpretation. An error that had stood for nearly half a century because no one with institutional power had cared enough to correct it. Captain Ben Salomon was never supposed to be a combat soldier in July 1944. That made him the perfect person to see what career officers couldn't. Born September 1, 1914, in Milwaukee, Salomon was an Eagle Scout who graduated from the University of Southern California and opened a dental practice in Beverly Hills in 1937. His patients included Hollywood actors. Then the draft notice arrived in November 1940. Most men with professional degrees were immediately commissioned as officers. Salomon entered the army as a private in the infantry. He was brilliant at it. Within a year, he'd been promoted to sergeant and put in charge of a machine gun section. His commanding officer declared him the best all-around soldier in the entire 102nd Infantry Regiment. He qualified as an expert marksman with both rifle and pistol. He understood fields of fire, enfilade positions, ammunition management, and the brutal calculus of machine gun defense. In August 1942, the Army discovered his dental degree and commissioned him as a first lieutenant in the Dental Corps. They took away his machine gun and gave him a drill. On June 22, 1944, the 105th Regiment's battalion surgeon was critically wounded. Salomon volunteered to replace him. For 15 days, he served as the 2nd Battalion surgeon, treating combat wounds under fire. But he remembered his infantry training. He remembered the machine gun. That dual identity, dentist and soldier, healer and killer, made him the only person in his aid station on July 7 who could see the actual solution. The solution was this: when the aid station becomes the battlefield, the doctor becomes the soldier. It sounds absurdly obvious in retrospect, but in the moment it violated every institutional framework. The experiment was conducted in real time, under fire. At approximately 5:05 a.m., Salomon grabbed a rifle and shot the first Japanese soldier who'd been bayoneting his patient. For the next 5 minutes, he engaged 7 more Japanese soldiers inside the tent. He clubbed 2 with his rifle butt. He bayoneted 1. He kicked a knife from another's hand and shot him. Total, 8 enemy combatants neutralized in close quarters combat. At 5:10 a.m., Salomon made the critical decision. He ordered all medical personnel and walking wounded to evacuate toward the regimental aid station. He armed himself and exited the tent to provide covering fire. Outside, he found the M1917 Browning machine gun position. The 4-man crew was dead. The gun was unmanned. Japanese soldiers were advancing past it, flanking American positions, moving toward where the wounded were evacuating. At 5:15 a.m., Salomon positioned himself behind the machine gun and opened fire. The before-after measurement was stark. Before Salomon took the gun, machine gun position unmanned, Japanese breakthrough imminent, 30 wounded Americans in direct path of enemy advance. After Salomon took the gun, sustained machine gun fire at 450 to 600 rounds per minute, Japanese advance stalled, all 30 wounded successfully evacuated. Salomon maintained defensive fire for approximately 1 to 2 hours. When American forces retook the position that evening, They found blood trails showing he'd moved the 103-pound weapon 4 separate times to maintain clear fields of fire. Each movement was made while he was already wounded. The proof was in the survival rate, approximately 30 wounded soldiers evacuated from Salomon's aid station. All survived because one dentist decided his job was keeping them alive by any means necessary. Here's the brutal truth. Salomon's solution didn't spread through official channels because there was no one left to spread it to. He died at his gun. But the principle that survival in combat requires every person capable of fighting to fight, regardless of job description, was being discovered simultaneously across the entire battlefield. Lieutenant Colonel O'Brien walked the front lines with 2 pistols. Private Baker refused evacuation and died with 8 bullets and 8 bodies. The solution was arrived at independently by everyone who survived. You hold until you die, because retreat means everyone behind you dies. By noon on July 7, the tactical results were measurable. Japanese objective, break through American lines. Japanese outcome, 4,311 killed. Breakthrough failed completely. American casualties in the 105th sector, 918 total, but the line held. Strategic result, Saipan remained secure, declared secure July 9, B-29 bombers operational from the island by October 1944. In Salomon's specific sector, the measurement was simpler, 98 dead Japanese soldiers in front of 1 machine gun position. Every one of those 98 was a soldier who didn't reach the evacuating wounded. The systematic transformation didn't happen in 1944. It happened 58 years later, and it had nothing to do with combat tactics. It had everything to do with institutional conscience. On May 1, 2002, President George W. Bush stood in the White House Rose Garden and placed the Medal of Honor around the neck of Dr. Robert West, accepting on behalf of Captain Ben Salomon, who'd been dead for 57 years, 9 months, and 24 days. Here's what had to change to make that ceremony possible. First, legal reinterpretation of the Geneva Convention. The 1944 rejection rested on the claim that medical officers using crew served weapons forfeited protected non-combatant status. By 2002, military legal scholars had clarified the Geneva Convention allows medical personnel to use any weapon, including machine guns, in defense of patients or self-defense, provided they're not wearing Red Cross insignia during combat. Salomon had removed his medical insignia before taking the gun. The 1944 rejection was simply wrong. Second, waiver of statute of limitations. Normally, Medal of Honor nominations must be submitted within 3 years. Salomon's case required Congress to waive that limitation, creating precedent that historical injustices could be corrected regardless of time elapsed. Third, institutional advocacy from the Army Dental Corps. Major General Patrick D. Scully, Chief of the Army Dental Corps in the late 1990s, personally championed Salomon's case. His argument, we have always had 2 professions, being a soldier and being a dentist, and Ben Salomon epitomized that. The transformation was philosophical, recognition that the categories themselves, combatant and non-combatant, are institutional fictions that break down in actual warfare. The machine gun Salomon used, the M1917 Browning, weighed 103 pounds with tripod and ammunition, and could fire 450 to 600 rounds per minute indefinitely without overheating. It was designed exactly for the tactical situation Salomon faced. That weapon evolved into the M1919, then the M60, then the M240 machine gun used today. But the principle remains identical, sustained automatic fire to create a zone that enemy infantry cannot cross. Here's what's evolved since 1944. Today's military doesn't classify anyone as truly non-combatant. In forward areas, all personnel, including medical staff, receive combat training. Medical aid stations are hardened defensive positions with designated security. The assumption is that medical facilities are targets, not protected zones. Modern Army medics complete training that includes small arms qualification, combat lifesaver skills, tactical casualty care under fire, and rules of engagement for defense of patients. This directly descends from lessons learned in World War II. Medical personnel who can't fight effectively become casualties themselves, along with their patients. The success metrics are unconventional because the transformation wasn't tactical, it was ethical. Immediate war outcome: Saipan secured July 9, 1944. B-29 bomber bases operational by October. First B-29 raid on Tokyo, November 24, 1944. Strategic bombing campaign continued until Japan's surrender, August 1945. The battle directly led to the resignation of Japanese Prime Minister Hideki Tojo's cabinet. Medal of Honor, Justice, 58-year delay, corrected. Precedent established for statute of limitations waivers. Salomon became first Army dentist ever awarded Medal of Honor. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the principle of every soldier fights when under attack was proven repeatedly. Medical personnel engaged enemy forces while treating casualties during ambushes. Combat medics received combat infantryman badges for actions under fire. No legal challenges to medical personnel using weapons in defense of patients. Issue resolved by Salomon precedent. Today, U.S. Army Special Forces medics are trained as both elite medical providers and combat soldiers. The 18D Special Forces Medical Sergeant qualification requires advanced trauma surgery skills plus Ranger School completion. Istio, the descendant of Salomon's dual identity, dentist and machine gunner, is now institutionalized doctrine. The story of Ben Salomon teaches something profound about institutional versus moral courage. Institutions create categories: combatant, non-combatant, officer, enlisted, doctor, soldier, because categories make bureaucracy manageable. But reality doesn't respect categories. When the categories break down, you're left with a simple moral question: what is the right thing to do right now? Salomon's answer was, the right thing is to defend the defenseless, even if it means becoming what your professional identity says you shouldn't be. The institution's answer in 1944 was, you broke the categories, so we can't honor you. The institution's answer in 2002 was, we were wrong. The categories were never as important as the courage. That transformation took 58 years, but it established a principle that extends far beyond military medals. When the rules prevent you from doing what's right, the problem is the rules, not the action. Captain Ben Salomon died at approximately 7:00 a.m. on July 7, 1944, slumped over a machine gun, his body bearing 76 wounds. He was 29 years old. He never married. He had no children. His dental practice in Beverly Hills was closed. His parents were his only immediate survivors. For 58 years, his name appeared only in military history books as a footnote: brave dentist, Medal of Honor nomination rejected. The surviving wounded soldiers he'd saved returned home, raised families, retired, and died, most never knowing whether their testimony mattered. Dr. Robert West, who'd never met Salomon, fought for 6 years to get the Medal of Honor awarded. When President Bush presented it, West accepted on behalf of the USC School of Dentistry, where a major clinic now bears Salomon's name. In 2002, the ceremony was attended by military brass and government officials. No immediate family survived. The medal itself was placed in the Army Medical Department Museum at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. But here's where Salomon's legacy actually lives: in every military medic who carries a rifle, in every dental officer who understands they're a soldier first, in every legal precedent that says non-combatant doesn't mean defenseless, in every institution that learns, however slowly, that courage doesn't fit in categories. On Saipan today, there's a memorial to the 27th Infantry Division. The beach where his aid station stood is 30 yards from the water, just as the report said. Tourists don't know anything happened there, but 98 Japanese soldiers knew. And 30 wounded Americans knew. And that dentist from Beverly Hills, who'd never asked to be a hero, who'd just tried to do the right thing in an impossible situation, knew. Sometimes that's enough.